Chapter 6. Toys Aren't Us. In the London office, Mrs. Jones sat waiting while Alan Blunt read the report. The sun was shining. A pigeon was strutting back and forth along the ledge outside as if it were keeping guard. "He's doing very well," Blunt said at last. "Remarkably well, in fact." He turned a page. "I see he missed target practice. Were you planning to give him a gun?" Mrs. Jones asked. "No. I don't think that would be a good idea." "Then why does he need target practice?" Blunt raised an eyebrow. "We can't give a teenager a gun," he said. "On the other hand, I don't think we can send him to Port Talon empty-handed. You'd better have a word with Smithers." "I already have. He's working on it now." Mrs. Jones stood up as if to leave. But at the door she hesitated. "I wonder if it's occurred to you that Ryder may have been preparing him for this all along," she said. "What do you mean?" "Preparing Alex to replace him. Ever since the boy was old enough to walk, he's been being trained for intelligence work, but without knowing it. I mean, he's lived abroad, so he now speaks French, German, and Spanish. He's been mountain climbing, diving, and skiing. He's learned karate. Physically, he's in perfect shape." She shrugged. "I think Ryder wanted Alex to become a spy." "But not so soon," Blunt said. "I agree. You know as well as I do, Alan, he's not ready yet. If we send him into Sale Enterprises, he's going to get himself killed." "Perhaps." The single word was cold, matter of fact. "He's 14 years old. We can't do it. We have to." Blunt stood up and opened the window, letting in the air and the sound of the traffic. The pigeon hurled itself off the ledge, afraid of him. "This whole business worries me," he said. "The Prime Minister sees the Stormbreakers as a major coup, for himself and for his government. But there's still something about Herod Sale that I don't like." "Did you tell the boy about Yasin Gregorovic?" "No," Mrs. Jones shook her head. "Then it's time you did. It was Yasin who killed his uncle. I'm sure of it. And if Yasin was working for Sale, what will you do if Yasin kills Alex Ryder?" "That's not our problem, Mrs. Jones. If the boy gets himself killed, at least it will be the final proof that there is something wrong. At the very least, it'll allow me to postpone the Stormbreaker project and take a good hard look at what's going on at Port Talon. In a way, it would almost help us if he was killed. The boy's not ready yet. He'll make mistakes. It won't take them long to find out who he is." Mrs. Jones sighed. "I don't think Alex has got much chance at all." "I agree." Blunt turned back from the window. The sun slanted over his shoulder. A single shadow fell across his face. "But it's too late to worry about that now," he said. "We have no more time. Stop the training now. Send him in." Alex sat hunched up in the back of the low-flying C-130 military aircraft, his stomach churning behind his knees. There were 11 men sitting in 2 lines around him, his own unit and 2 others. For an hour now, the plane had been flying at just 300 feet, following the Welsh valleys, dipping and swerving to avoid the mountain peaks. A single bulb glowed red behind a wire mesh, adding to the heat in the cramped cabin. Alex could feel the engines vibrating through him. It was like traveling in a spin dryer and microwave oven combined. The thought of jumping out of a plane with an oversized silk umbrella would have made Alex sick with fear, but only that morning he'd been told that he wouldn't in fact be jumping. A message from London. They couldn't risk him breaking a leg, it said, and Alex guessed that the end of his training was near. Even so, he'd been taught how to pack a parachute, how to control it, how to exit a plane, and how to land. And at the end of the day, the sergeant had instructed him to join the flight, just for the experience. Now, close to the drop zone, Alex felt almost disappointed. He'd watch everyone else jump and then he'd be left alone. P-5. The voice of the pilot came over the speaker system, distant and metallic. Alex gritted his teeth. 5 minutes until the jump. He looked at the other men, shuffling into position, checking the cords that connected them to the static line. He was sitting next to Wolf. To his surprise, the man was completely quiet, unmoving. It was hard to tell in the half-darkness, but the look on his face could almost have been fear. There was a loud buzz, and the red light turned green. The assistant pilot had climbed through from the cockpit. He reached for a handle and pulled open a door set in the back of the aircraft, allowing the cold air to rush in. Alex could see a single square of night. It was raining. The rain howled past. The green light began to flash. The assistant pilot tapped the first pair on their shoulders, and Alex watched them shuffle over to the side and then throw themselves out. For a moment they were there, frozen in the doorway. Then they were gone like a photograph crumpled and spun away by the wind. 2 more men followed. Then another 2. Wolf would be the last to leave, and with Alex not jumping, he would be on his own. It took less than a minute. Suddenly Alex was aware that only he and Wolf were left. "Move it," the assistant pilot shouted above the roar of the engines. Wolf picked himself up. His eyes briefly met Alex's, and in that moment Alex knew. Wolf was a popular leader. He was tough and he was fast, completing a 30-mile hike as if it were just a stroll in a park. But he had a weak spot. Somehow he'd allowed this parachute jump to get to him and he was too scared to move. It was hard to believe, but there he was, frozen in the doorway, his arms rigid, staring out. Alex glanced back. The assistant pilot was looking the other way. He hadn't seen what was happening. And when he did, if Wolf failed to make the jump, it would be the end of his training and maybe even the end of his career. Even hesitating would be bad enough. He'd be binned. Alex thought for a moment. Wolf hadn't moved. Alex could see his shoulders rising and falling as he tried to summon up the courage to go. 10 seconds had passed. Maybe more. The assistant pilot was leaning down, stowing away a piece of equipment. Alex stood up. "Wolf," he said. Wolf didn't hear him. Alex took one last quick look at the assistant pilot, then kicked out with all his strength. His foot slammed into Wolf's backside. He'd put all his strength behind it. Wolf was caught by surprise, his hands coming free as he plunged into the swirling night air. The assistant pilot turned around and saw Alex. "What are you doing?" he shouted. "Just stretching my legs," Alex shouted back. The plane curved in the air and began the journey home. Mrs. Jones was waiting for him when he walked into the hangar. She was sitting at a table, wearing a gray silk jacket and trousers, with a black handkerchief flowing out of her top pocket. For a moment she didn't recognize him. Alex was dressed in a flying suit. His hair was damp from the rain. His face was pinched with tiredness, and he seemed to have grown older over the past 2 weeks. None of the men had arrived back yet. A truck had been sent to collect them from a field about 2 miles away. "Alex," she said. Alex looked at her, but said nothing. "It was my decision to stop you from jumping," she said. "I hope you're not disappointed. I just thought it was too much of a risk. Please. Sit down." Alex sat down opposite her. "I have something that might cheer you up," she went on. "I've brought you some toys." "I'm too old for toys," Alex said. "Not these toys." She signaled, and a man appeared, walking out of the shadows, carrying a tray of equipment that he set down on the table. The man was enormously fat. When he sat down, the metal chair disappeared beneath the spread of his buttocks, and Alex was surprised it could even take his weight. He was bald with a black mustache and several chins, each one melting into the next and finally into his neck and shoulders. He wore a pinstriped suit, which must have used enough material to make a tent. "Smithers," he said, nodding at Alex. "Very nice to meet you, old chap. What have you got for him?" Mrs. Jones demanded. "I'm afraid we haven't had a great deal of time, Mrs. J," Smithers replied. The challenge was to think what a 14-year-old might carry with him and adapt it. He picked the first object off the tray. A yo-yo. It was slightly larger than normal, black plastic. "Let's start with this," Smithers said. Alex shook his head. He couldn't believe any of this. "Don't tell me," he exclaimed. "It's some sort of secret weapon." "Not exactly. I was told you weren't to have weapons. You're too young. So it's not really a hand grenade? Pull the string and run like hell?" "Certainly not. It's a yo-yo." Smithers pulled out the string, holding it between a pudgy finger and thumb. However, the string is a special sort of nylon. Very advanced. There's 30 yards of it and it can lift weights of up to 200 pounds. The actual yo-yo is motorized and clips onto your belt. Very useful for climbing. Amazing. Alex was unimpressed. "And then there's this." Mr. Smithers produced a small tube. Alex read the side, "ZIT clean. For healthier skin." "Nothing personal," Smithers went on, apologetically. "But we thought it was something a boy of your age might carry. And it is rather remarkable." He opened the tube and squeezed some of the cream onto his finger. "Completely harmless when you touch it. But bring it into contact with metal and it's quite another story." He wiped his finger, smearing the cream onto the surface of the table. For a moment nothing happened. Then a wisp of acrid smoke twisted upward in the air, the metal sizzled, and a jagged hole appeared. "It'll do that to just about any metal," Smithers explained. "Very useful if you need to break through a lock." He took out a handkerchief and wiped his finger clean. "Anything else?" Mrs. Jones asked. "Oh yes, Mrs. J. You could say this is our piece de resistance." He picked up a brightly colored box that Alex recognized at once as a Nintendo Color Game Boy. "What teenager would be complete without one of these?" he asked. "This one comes with 4 games. And the beauty of it is, each cartridge turns the computer into something quite different." He showed Alex the first game. Nemesis. If you insert this one, the computer becomes a fax/photocopier, which gives you direct contact with us and vice versa. Just pass the screen across any page you want to transmit and we'll have it in seconds. He produced a second game, Exocet. This one turns the computer into an X-ray device. Place the machine against any solid surface less than 2 inches thick and watch the screen. It has an audio function too. You just have to plug in the earphones. Useful for eavesdropping. It's not as powerful as I'd like, but we're working on it. The third game was called Speed Wars. This one's a bug finder, Smithers explained. You can use the computer to sweep a room and check if somebody's trying to listen in on you. I suggest you use it the moment you arrive. And finally, my own favorite. Smithers held up a final cartridge. It was labeled Bomber Boy. "Do I get to play this one?" Alex asked. "You can play all 4 of them. They all have a built-in games function. But as the name might suggest, this is actually a smoke bomb. This time, the cartridge doesn't go into the machine. You leave it somewhere in a room and press start 3 times on the console, and the bomb will be set off by remote control. Useful camouflage if you need to escape in a hurry." "Thank you, Smithers," Mrs. Jones said. "My pleasure, Mrs. J." Smithers stood up, his legs straining to take the huge weight. "I'll hope to see you again, Alex." I've never had to equip a boy before. I'm sure I'll be able to think up a whole host of quite delightful ideas." He waddled off and disappeared through a door that clanged shut behind him. Mrs. Jones turned to Alex. "You leave tomorrow for Port Talon," she said. "You'll be going under the name of Felix Lester." She handed him an envelope. "The real Felix Lester left for Florida yesterday. You'll find everything you need to know about him in here. I'll read it in bed." "Good." Suddenly she was serious, and Alex found himself wondering if she was herself a mother. If so, she could well have a son his age. She took out a black and white photograph and laid it on the table. It showed a man in a white t-shirt and jeans. He was in his late 20s with light, close-cropped hair, a smooth face, the body of a dance. The photograph was slightly blurred. It had been taken from a distance, possibly with a hidden camera. "I want you to look at this," she said. "I'm looking." His name is Yasin Gregorovic. He was born in Russia, but he now works for many countries. Iraq has employed him. Also Serbia, Libya, and China. "What does he do?" Alex asked. "He's a contract killer, Alex. We believe it was he who killed Ian Ryder." There was a long pause. Alex had almost managed to persuade himself that this whole business was just some sort of crazy adventure, a game. But looking at the cold face with its blank, hooded eyes, he felt something stirring inside him and knew it was fear. He remembered his uncle's car, shattered by bullets. A man like this, a contract killer, would do the same to him. He wouldn't even blink. "This photograph was taken 6 months ago, in Cuba," Mrs. Jones was saying. "It may have been a coincidence, but Herod Sale was there at the same time. The two of them may have met. And there is something else." She paused. Ryder used a code in the last message he sent. A single letter. Why? Why for Yasin? He must have seen Yasin somewhere in Port Talon. He wanted us to know. "Why are you telling me this now?" Alex asked. His mouth had gone dry. "Because if you see him, if Yasin is anywhere near Sale Enterprises, I want you to contact us at once. And then? We'll pull you out. It doesn't matter how old you are, Alex. If Yasin finds out you're working for us, he'll kill you too." She took the photograph back. Alex stood up. "You'll leave here tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, Mrs. Jones said. Be careful, Alex. And good luck." Alex walked across the hangar, his footsteps echoing. Behind him, Mrs. Jones unwrapped a peppermint and slipped it into her mouth. Her breath always smelled faintly of mint. As head of special operations, how many men had she sent to their deaths? Ian Ryder and maybe dozens more. Perhaps it was easier for her if her breath was sweet. There was a movement ahead of him, and he saw that the parachutists had gotten back from their jump. They were walking toward him out of the darkness, with Wolf and the other men from K Unit right at the front. Alex tried to step around them, but he found Wolf blocking his way. "You're leaving," Wolf said. Somehow he must have heard that Alex's training was over. "Yes." There was a long pause. "What happened on the plane?" he began. "Forget it, Wolf," Alex said. "Nothing happened. You jumped and I didn't. That's all." Wolf held out a hard. "I want you to know. I was wrong about you. You're all right. And maybe, one day it would be good to work with you." "You never know," Alex said. They shook. "Good luck, Cub." "Goodbye, Wolf." Alex walked out into the night.